Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I'm going to do something a little different today. I haven't done this in a while, so I decided I'm going to go ahead and just voice over my training footage from last week for this week's Q&As so that you people get something slightly different. You can watch me lift as opposed to just sitting in front of the camera talking. So let's do that. All right, first question. How do we strengthen our knees that hurt while squatting or any other leg work? Should I take a break from leg day or stick to cycling and free squats? Thanks, brother. All right, knee pain from squatting can be caused by a few different things. I looked at something he was doing and he noted he had been doing heavy leg extensions, and another person told him, hey brother, you need to back off on those leg extensions. And he said, well, I'm already reducing the weight. And he said, okay, I'll quit doing them. Number one on the list, if your knees are hurting from squatting, leg extensions could be the culprit. Leg extensions themselves can cause damage to the knees. Number two, if you've been using wraps or sleeves on your knees, those things need to go. Wraps and sleeves can absolutely contribute to knee injury. And you also need to start looking at stuff like dorsiflexion and everything else going on with your ankles. You need to work on basically your overall mobility. So I'm going to recommend you do third world squats. Start learning to do third world squats, even if you have to squat down to a box to get used to them. At first, you need to work on overall mobility. That's absolutely critical. Another thing you need to focus on is strengthening your hamstrings. And because again, muscle imbalances, being quad dominant can actually contribute to knee pain and potentially knee injury. So it's something to consider. So start working on that also. Weak hamstrings, weak hips, stuff like that. So how do you strengthen those things? Put a little heavier focus on your posterior chain. Deadlifts, start doing more deadlifts. You know what, if you're also getting knee pain, Romanian deadlifts could be a good accessory exercise for you to work on. But ultimately what you're going to find there is that it could be a case of just overall quad dominance that's contributing to it, mobility issues that are contributed to it, things like wraps, sleeves, all of that. All right, next question. Hey Jason, so with LISS tapping into fat stores, combining that with a very low fat diet, is it possible that one could be losing fat faster than what the deficit would imply? Say only a 200 calorie deficit, but keeping dietary fat under 25 grams a day and doing 2 to 3 hours of LISS. I found that to be the case, but I guess anecdotes don't mean much, haha. No, I did a longer video on this earlier this week just so that people kind of understand what's up. As far as that goes, for highly conditioned people, yeah, that does seem to possibly be the case. Someone who's relatively new to cardio, only got a few months of doing real LISS cardio, probably not. But the more you adapt to LISS, it's again the stuff I was talking about with Alex Viata the other day, the more consistently you burn a higher ratio of fat to glucose when doing it. So yeah, in theory, someone who is again very conditioned to their LISS cardio, who again isn't maybe doing an enormous caloric deficit, could possibly lose body fat faster than their caloric deficit implies, because they simply are not storing any of the carbs they're eating really as body fat. You're not going to see real de novo lipogenesis of significant degrees, particularly with a small caloric deficit, not going to happen. And you're burning more fat calories than you're consuming. Again, a larger ratio than what your caloric deficit implies. Yeah, you could lose body fat a little faster. Now, is it going to be dramatic? No, probably not. And again, this is a bit of a metabolic trick that people can do, and it does work. And it is metabolic trickery because it does allow you to work a bit through what people are thinking of as calories in and calories out, but it really isn't. You're still losing body fat because you're in a caloric deficit. Now, where it gets interesting is that can people lose body fat this way without a caloric deficit? And I would say possibly yes. Again, someone who is very conditioned with a high work capacity could use this as a recomposition tool effectively without creating caloric deficit, but that's a whole nother ball game. All right, next question. What's the optimum resting behavior if I'm doing 3 sets of 12 reps and I can only finish my last rep and last set if I only rested longer? What's optimal for training? Resting longer to finish the reps, or resting normal and not finishing it? All right, basically we're talking about total tonnage and workload versus workload density. Now, this is something I need to correct myself on, because I had said years ago that workload density was a form of progressive overload, meaning if you could do the same amount of work in less time, that it should give you additional progressive overload, additional muscle growth. Studies have shown that not to be the case, meaning workload density actually becomes worthless, absolutely worthless, if it decreases the amount of weight you use on the bar, or it decreases the total tonnage of the workout. Now, the reason certain protocols for dynamic effort work and stuff work really well has to do with the fact that you're getting the minimum rest time you need to repeat speed work. But it's not like you're creating much individual fatigue with each of those sets, so it's totally different. What the studies have shown is that any rest time that's cut so short that you can't complete the set with the previous weight that you were using for the previous number of reps produces slightly less hypertrophy. So that being said, rest as long as you need to rest to complete your prescribed sets, and it's going to have a stronger anabolic stimulus, and that's the way to look at it. It'll have a stronger stimulus. For most people, that's going to be probably around 3 minutes. Usually if you're having to rest longer than 3 minutes to complete a set, you're probably simply trying to do too much workload in any given exercise. You probably took the set all the way to muscle failure, if that's the case, in which case, again, probably not ideal for multi-set training to start taking your early sets to failure. I'm going to say for multi-set training, even if hypertrophy is the goal, unless you're working with really, really high reps, you shouldn't be taking sets to failure. So if you're just short of failure, meaning you're 1 or 2 reps short of failure, you should be able to recover enough within 3 minutes to do it. And if you can't, there's a larger problem going on. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I've hurt my shoulder playing rugby, and it's impacted me in the gym, like I can't do certain lifts without pain and other lifts you can't do at all. How can I overcome this or rehab my shoulder so that I can get back to doing my lifting without pain? All right, if you've injured yourself playing a contact sport like rugby, you really need to go see a physical therapist. Now, I'm going to assume, because you're talking about rugby, hopefully you're British, your NHS should be able to set you up with a rehabilitation therapist. For a lot of people, I mean, again, if you were in the US and you came from a poorer family or something, it might be a little bit different depending on where you live. But it sounds probably, if you're playing rugby a lot, probably in the UK, in which case the NHS will definitely set you up with a rehabilitative sports therapist. It may not be a great one, but you should have access to one, so you need to go do that. Number 2, some other things I always tell people. Once you have hurt your shoulders in any way, you need to start changing the way that you do things. There's several things that I'm going to tell people they need to always do in the gym. Just like you guys see us do with Brittany, what do? She does only narrow grip work. We don't do any exercises where she grips the bar wider than shoulder width, right? We don't do overhead pressing with a wider grip. We don't do bench pressing with a wide grip. We don't do pull downs with a wide grip. Everything is shoulder width or narrower. Her lat pull downs, she does with that little smaller handle in front of her chest, right? Nothing wide grip. That's more protective of the shoulders. So if you've hurt your shoulders, that's going to be part of what you need to do to maintain their health so that you put less strain on them in the future. Number 2, you need to do face pulls. You're going to have to do other rehabilitative work, but face pulls, keep those rear delts as strong as possible, because once you've had a shoulder injury, pressing in general will always have a risk of hurting you and causing other problems. So the best thing you could possibly do is to no longer do things like that that are going to potentially compromise your shoulder. So you need to be very, very careful of that in the future, because again, shoulder injuries are one of those things that they have that tendency to possibly cause other problems down the road, and you just need to be aware of that. It's going to help you a lot if you just do prehab and be very careful in your exercise selection from now on. But you absolutely need to go see a sports physical therapist. It needs to be done. It's not an option. All right, next question. Hey Jason, is there a big difference between incline and flat grip or flat closed grip bench press regarding triceps heads works? Which one would you prefer as an accessory movement? That's a bit of a tough one. It really depends on what you're trying to do. As far as the exercises go, flat versus incline close grip bench press. Again, that would depend absolutely on your weaknesses and your various needs as any sort of accessory work. But I wouldn't necessarily count those probably as an accessory work. A flat close grip bench press is probably going to be a primary exercise. Regarding triceps, I don't think you're going to see a real significant difference there. I just really don't think you're going to see one. And the reason I say that is simply because they're too close together in angles. When we start talking about the long head getting extra work doing any of this stuff, we're usually talking about what? We're talking about that stretch. You get that more from going overhead. An incline, even a relatively steep incline, probably isn't going to have a significant difference in the ratio at which it works the long head versus the lateral and medial head. So I don't think you're going to see any difference at all. I think your tricep stimulation on the two exercises is probably going to be pretty much the same with no significant differences. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I've been looking at some of your videos recently a bit further back concerning cooking oils. However, what is your stance on using the 1-calorie olive oil sprays to cook lean meats such as chicken or turkey breast to mitigate the damages that oils do? Usually I tell people you don't need to cook with oils at all, but if you're wanting just a little bit of that just to keep them from sticking to the pan a little bit, using a very, very small of olive oil like that is probably okay. What you really want to avoid are other sorts of vegetable oils. I would absolutely avoid any sort of canola oil, anything like that with a high omega-6 content, because those high temperatures from the omega-6 are usually where you're concerned with the biggest health problems, the biggest issues, the things that you really, really need to be worried about. So that's the direction I would go with that. I mean, yeah, a little drop of olive oil, probably reasonable just to keep them from sticking to the pan. Those things have very small amounts. Now keep in mind, sometimes that 1 calorie is for a little tiny spray. If you sprayed it really hard, it could turn into a lot more very, very quickly. But again, yeah, I don't recommend people cook with oils, but that, again, that's probably reasonable. I don't think you're likely to have problems. You're not going to have carcinogens and damaged omega-6s, which are possibly trans fats and all that stuff there. So again, probably not a problem. All right, next question. Obviously, you are a huge proponent of cardio and have talked much about the subject, but would you mind sharing your thoughts on the merits of different cardio machines or modalities? I seem to recall research that indicated the recumbent bike as being much better for concurrent training with weights, as it did not interfere with muscular adaptations to strength training as much as something like jogging on a treadmill. Yeah, I generally recommend the recumbent bike, but you need to understand that this is all going to be sport specific. It's going to be sport specific. Just because something is going to have less interference there doesn't mean it's going to be the best thing for your goals. If you want to be a runner, for example, you need to run. You're going to have to do some running. But as far as it interfering with concurrent training, yeah, recumbent bike has less because there's less impact, less jarring. A lot of that has to do with less microfracturing in the bones and the tibula and everything. That's probably one of the biggest factors. But there's other things going on with it. So yeah, recumbent bike for general cardio, if your goal is just to improve cardiovascular capacity, improve endurance, and burn through extra calories, that's a fantastic way to do it. That's personally what I mostly do. But it's going to help you be a better runner, but it's not going to help you as much as actually running will. If you're going to be an actual runner, you're just going to have to learn to balance the two out. And that's where guys like Alex Viada really come in handy with a lot of his material. Like if you want to actually be a strength athlete who does a lot of running, that's where you want to go check someone like him and see what they have to say. Check his book out. All right, next question. Hey Jason, what are your thoughts about Kinobody and Brandon Carter being on steroids? Are they suitable physiques to strive for? Meaning, is it possible? All right, I'm going to have to be totally honest with you here, brother. If you're looking for a physique to strive for and you're using someone who makes their living, and in this case, guys who are probably making well into six-figure livings off of their physique, if you think that people who are trying to make money, real money off their physiques, not 10 grand a year, aren't using some anabolics or something to help with it, you're really, really naive. There's no way anyone who's really trying to become a successful fitness YouTuber, given how much emphasis is put upon how you look, that seems to be one of the biggest factors. It's a big factor in how much money you're going to make on YouTube, unfortunately. Assuming that they're not using drugs would be absurdly naive. It would be a bad business move for them to actually be clean. Now, as far as obtainable natural, Brandon Carter, I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell that he's natty. Probably not. But Kinobody, maybe he's natty, maybe he's not. Because he's trying to make money doing it, I would say there's a strong possibility of gear use. But is where he's at obtainable natural for a lot of people, even a very large percentage of people? Yeah, it's possible. You have to work relatively hard, but it's totally doable. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.